I've got a bad 12-volt battery in my tractor. It's about 7 years old and will no longer crank the engine enough to start it without a jump. I can only fit a Group 51 12-volt battery in my tractor, and I'd prefer not to spend the $130 to buy a new one. So I went online to see if I could somehow restore or revive this battery. I found quite a few popular videos with titles stating that I would never have to buy a new battery again, or at least that I could revive my battery and get more use out of it. I'd sure like to save the $130, so I'm going to follow the instructions on these popular videos and hopefully revive this battery.
That's a good idea.
I've got a bad battery here. If we go ahead and put it on the multimeter here, got it set on 20 DC volts. Touch the probes to the posts. I've got 12.3132 DC volts. And some of you might think, well, that'll start an engine, but it won't. The cranking amps are shot. And from what I understand, that sulfur builds up and causes the battery to lose the power to start the vehicle. So I'd prefer not to go out and buy a new battery. I went on YouTube, did a bunch of research, watched a bunch of videos. There's one guy that drains his battery and then puts baking soda mixed with distilled water in with the acid that he drains out of these batteries and fills it back up and puts a charger on, and he's able to get a charge. Well, I'm able to get a charge. I'm able to get 12 volts here. But what I'm not able to do is start the engine, and I need a battery that'll start the engine. So I watched another video. It seemed to make sense to me. Whether it does or not, we'll find out. But it seemed to make sense to me, and if it works, it'll save me $130 on this Group 51 battery that my vehicle requires. So let's get started, see what we can do. Hopefully it'll work. We'll put on the load tester and see how it tests.
Says it's got about 12 volts.
12 volts. And
Drops down to about 9 3/4, and it just says it needs to be charged for 30 minutes.
And I've charged it, so we've got a weak battery. I'm going to throw it back in and see if it'll turn the engine over. So that's not good. So we'll go ahead and run this test and see if it really works. I hope it does. I borrowed the charger from a friend of mine and put it on 12 volt, 200 amp engine start, and 15 minutes. Pop the caps off so the gases won't be trapped, and make sure that we've got enough acid or distilled water in there. You want to be down about a ½ inch from the top, but you want to make sure the plates are covered. You don't want to see the plates, about a ½ inch above the plates. We're good. So we'll do 15-minute charge, let it rest an hour, 15-minute charge, let it rest an hour. We'll do that 5 times and see if it revives the battery. There's our first 15 minutes completed. We'll go ahead and shut it down, let it sit for an hour, and then we'll do another 15 minutes. The first round of desulfation is done, and we'll move on to round 2. The battery's warm but not hot. And now another hour of rest. Done with round 3. Just finishing our 4th round of charging, and you can see the cells are bubbling quite a bit. Sure hope this works. We'll give it an hour to rest and then one more round of 15 minutes and we'll be set. Alright, we've made it to our last round of charging. This is the 5th one. You can see the acids bubbling very well. And my great hope is that the sulfation, which is the crystallization of lead sulfate on the lead plates, has been dissolved and the battery has been restored. We'll let that sit overnight, at least 12 hours, probably more like 16 or so. And then we'll see if we have revived this battery. I sure hope so. Okay, just took it off the trickle charger and we'll run some tests. We'll check how many volts we have. .06, and I've never been able to charge it that high before, so that's a positive sign. Now we'll go ahead and load test this. Just under 13 volts. Put a load on it. We're about 10.5. Barely good. Now let's install it in the tractor and see how it cranks. That's not good. Well, after all that work, I would say that was not successful.
That's not good.
Just so you know, I'm going to put a good battery in there and show you that the engine does crank fine. It's not a problem with the starter, but I've got a problem with a bad battery that I'm trying to revive. Cranks right up. I'm going to try one more thing that's popular on YouTube and see if I can revive this battery. Now what we're going to do is drain the battery and try the baking soda, which is another touted YouTube fix for batteries. Pull the caps off and drain the acid out. Alright, got the acid out. And it's dirty. And filter out the acid. You want to be real careful with this stuff. It'll burn your clothes. It will stain your concrete. So be careful with it. It burns your skin a little bit. While we're waiting for that to filter out, I'm going to go ahead and put my mix of baking soda and distilled water in the battery to hopefully get rid of the contaminants that are in there and free up the plates. So I think it takes about 4 cups of distilled water. I've got 2 cups or 1.5 cups in here, and I'm going to go with 1 cup of baking soda. Hopefully that's cleaning off all the plates. Alright. Okay, I'm going to put the caps back on. And I'm going to rinse this off. You can see it's still bubbling in there. I'm just going to shake it. Yeehaw! I'm going to keep shaking it until it quits having that reaction and neutralizes that. And get all the junk out of there. Hopefully cleaning those plates. It's been about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Got this strained out. Okay, I got it all shaken up. Now I can dump it back in here. Dirty stuff. And I'm going to keep flushing it out. Give it another shake. And we'll go with another flush. And here's our final flush. The last one was pretty clean, so I think this one will do it. We'll let that drain out good. Now with our filtered acid, we'll go ahead and fill it back up. And see how it is. Probably topped off with a little distilled water too. Again, you don't want to spill this or get it on your clothes. Irritate your hands, your clothes, put holes in your clothes. So I'm using acid and distilled water. And we'll just top these off. Want to make sure to cover those plates, but stay down about a ½ inch. And we're good. We'll take the volts, pre-charge, negative, positive. We got 11.96. We'll go ahead and put it on the trickle charger and see how many DC volts we get, but also we'll do a load test on it, and then most importantly, we'll put it back in the tractor and see if it'll start it up. It's been about 30 hours on the trickle charger. The cell level is still good. 12.8283, which is just fine. But like I said, that's great, but it doesn't do any good for cranking amps. So let's see what we got for cranking amps in our load test. I need to turn the battery around for this. And we're showing 13. Now we'll do our 10-second load test. Oh, that's not good. I wished it would have stayed up higher. It's pretty much the way the last test went. And we didn't even come back up to 13. We went up to 12 on this. I'm going to go ahead and put it back on the trickle charger. Let it trickle charge for 24 more hours. And do this test again and then install it and see if it'll crank the engine. This trickle charger has been on for 4 days. And we'll go ahead and run the test. And see how it's doing. And we have I just took the charger off, but we got 13.09 volts, which is fantastic. But the real test is the load test. We've got our 13 volts there. Put this on for 10 seconds. We came up a little, but we're at about 9 3/4 volts, which isn't great, but a little better than it was a couple days ago. But the big test is we'll put it in the tractor and see if it'll turn the engine over. Not good. Well, before I give up on this revive your battery testing, I'm going to try one more, and I'm going to drain that battery completely of the acid that's in it. I'm going to put distilled water with Epsom salt in, and that's supposed to encourage desulfating the lead panels in there, and we'll see if that works. Next test. Going to dump all this battery acid out of here and replace it with distilled water and Epsom salt. You want to be careful with this acid. That all drained out. While we are letting that drain, let's go heat up some distilled water and mix our Epsom salts. Okay, and back into the stove here, taking distilled water, and we'll go with about 4 cups, might be a little more than that, but we're going to heat this up, not boiling, but warm, so it'll dissolve the Epsom salts. I actually ended up putting a little less than half a gallon in. And I'm going to go with 1 cup of Epsom salt. This is a half cup here, so I'll do 2 of these in there. And you can see it's smoking a little bit. That water doesn't need to be any hotter than that. There's a half cup. And 1 cup, which is about 16 ounces. Now I'm going to stir this so it all dissolves in there and let it cool, and we'll put it in the battery. You can see that's all dissolved in there now. And we just need it to cool so we can put it in the battery. And I'll go ahead and top them off with distilled water. And what this is supposed to do is help with dissolving the sulfation and potentially rejuvenating the battery, and we'll find out. 11.6. We'll put the trickle charger on for a day, probably 2 days, and we'll see what we get, and most importantly, the load test and the cold cranking amps when we reinstall it. 2 amps we're putting on this. Hope it works. We're getting to the end of the line here. It's been a little over 48 hours on the trickle charger. And we'll go ahead and unplug that and check our DC volts. 13. 12.9997. It's dropping. I guess I'll let that settle out a little bit and check it again since I just pulled it off the charger. We'll check the voltage. We've got 12.79, which is good. And I sure do hope we get the cranking amps. We'll go ahead and put a load on it and see what we get with that. I've got to turn this around so I can show you the reading. And we're just under 13 there. Put our 10-second load on and hopefully we'll stay above 10. Oh, no, 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 no. We're not even 9. That's not good. And it's not bouncing back. We're only up to about 11 now. Not good at all. With such a poor reading on the load test, it's not even worth throwing it back in the tractor and see if it'll start. So I'm going to try one last thing. It's possible that the trickle charger just can't kick it up the way it needs. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it back on this high boost charger, 200 amps in the start mode, and give it a couple shots of that and see if that kicks the battery in. Of course, you have to have the vent caps off. Hook up the positive first. And we'll set it for 15 minutes. The cells are all bubbling nicely, every one of them. So we'll throw it back in the tractor. Not enough. So after all that, days of work and messing around trying to revive this battery, does it work? It didn't for me. Did it improve the voltage of the sitting battery? Yeah, I could get that up where it's supposed to be. Could I get the cranking amps I needed to turn the engine over? No, I couldn't. I tried 3 different procedures that were popular online with multiple millions of views that all said never buy a battery again, and it didn't work out that way for me. I guess it's time to go out and buy a new battery.
That's a good idea.